Yeah, I guess we're going to start. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Theodore Biodala. I'm a core JavaScript maintainer for Drupal 8 and 7, and I'm going to talk about Headful Drupal. So just show of hands, who's familiar with Headless Decoupled Drupal? Yeah, so you all went to the keynote this morning. So usually, on Drupal 7, when you have a client, he wants a UI for some reason. And the process of developing that, it's just pain and misery. You're just picking up your the shards of your client's broken dream and trying to make them fit, and you cut yourself in a process. So let's say you're a surgeon, plastic surgeon, and you have a face to make nicer. So if you have the default Drupal 7 face, which is a bit crazy. So you put a mask on top of it. Could be Zen, could be Mothership, Omega, Bootstrap, and you work on top of that. But the crazy is still underneath. So whenever you want to do something a bit more involved, it gets really ugly. It's a bit big for taking notes. So because people don't like crazy, they're just saying, okay, we're not going to use the Drupal UI at all, and we're going headless, whatever that means. It really picked up last year around some DrupalCon as well. The term headless and making headless websites. It's like Web 2.0 at this point. Just to make sure we're in sync, this is a graph from a Pantheon blog post. I mean, usual static website, you have files, browser, simple. Usual Drupal website, database, PHP, browser, simple. And the headless or decoupled way, you have the database, PHP, some JavaScript stuff that will render your content, and the browser. Unless it's not really true. What really happens is that it's the browser that renders everything. I mean, there's no extra step. It's just more stuff on the browser. So is it really headless or decoupled to do it that way? I mean, there are proper ways to do that. I have a slide at the end where I can show you, what a proper decoupled way look like. But if you do it this way, just push more stuff to the browser when you use Angular, React, or that kind of stuff. The front-end logic, there's not much logic in it. It's just template rendering and routing. So you go to a page and JavaScript takes care of loading everything. But if you look at blog posts or just talk with people that did decoupled implementation, they keep the Drupal admin UI because they're not that dumb or rich, because it's really complicated. I mean, there's lots of stuff you can do in the Drupal admin UI, and it doesn't make sense to just build a whole JavaScript app for 10 person, and even 10 is a lot of people. And the business logic, it's all still in the backend. So you still have rules, you still have views, all that kind of stuff, but you just get the data in a different way. So business logic could be, it's a brain, kind of. So it's not really headless. I mean, decoupled, it's kind of a fancy way of talking about headless. Another Krell here is, that's a kind of terminology he likes, I guess. But it's, it's really faceless Drupal. You just keep the brain, you just don't want to see it. And, if you're a surgeon and you have a faceless human being, you have to draw everything again. You have to make everything that was already there, which is, forms, authentication, that kind of stuff. It used to be there in Drupal, but because you go headless, you have to make it from scratch. And because it's all about what you see, what you don't see gets left out. And what you don't see is security and accessibility, usually. Because if you get data from the Drupal backend, it's not sanitized. Well, if you don't do anything special with it. So you have to sanitize it on the JavaScript side. And, people sometimes forget about that. And I guess it's even worse in Drupal 8, because now we use Twig auto-escaping. So all the data you're going to get back from, from Drupal before Twig, it's not going to be sanitized. So you have a lot more things to take care of on the front end. So what would something, ideal look like? And if you have any questions, just, stop me and we can talk about it. It's a conversation afterwards. So what you would like is some, basic, non-really opinionated baseline to work with, and you just stick stuff on top of that. It's, Monsieur Patate Drupal. You just put eyes, nose, mustache. You want hipster Drupal, and you don't have to be a trained surgeon to do that. You can, be a kid and just stick stuff on your Drupal to make it nice. And the thing is that we have a way to make the individual pieces, features, kind of standalone. So you could use them within Drupal, but also within your own JavaScript-y stuff. So you don't have to use Drupal to have some Drupal features. Well, hopefully it will make sense later. So the way to package those kind of features are web components. So who heard about web components? Oh, wow, nice. Who's using web components? Nice. It's like 3 or 4 people. And web components, it's just a fancy term to describe 4 technologies, actually. So the way it looks, it's like that. So first you have standard HTML page. You can see in the head space you have a link import. So this is an HTML file that contains a template and some JavaScript, and maybe some CSS, whatever you want. It's HTML after all. And this will be all the logic of your component. And you see in the body of your HTML, you have a custom tag, which is hello world, with some attribute. And this is, if you make a view source of your page, you're going to see only this tag. But if you inspect it with the DOM inspector from Firefox or Chrome, you're going to see the shadow DOM. So this is additional elements added by your widget, using the template that's in the imported HTML file. So I don't have the imported HTML file to show you, but if you open that file, the hello world.html, you have a template tag with the P, hello, strong, and closing P stuff. And then the JavaScript will replace what's within the strong tag with whatever is in the who attribute of this tag. So does it make sense? Yes, for some people at least. So when can we use that? Well, if you're a user on Chrome or Opera, you can use it right now. Otherwise, you need to polyfill all this stuff. So there are different polyfills available. Google Polymer, then, I don't know, others, X template, all those kind of stuff. So the first technology is HTML templates. So this is what's in the imported HTML file to just make up what's within the shadow DOM. The second one is HTML import. So the fact that you have a link rel import that the browser will download and execute, this is what this is about. Then you have the custom element. So with custom element, you have a whole JavaScript API that you can use to react on attribute change or whatever else you want. And the last one is shadow DOM. So for example, if you have a select list, it's not just a simple tag. The browser will replace your select list with a whole widget, keyboard control, that kind of stuff. So the shadow DOM is all the elements needed to render this fancy select widget instead of just a div type, for example. Or the HTML5 form inputs as well. So when you have an input number and then there's arrows, to increase the value of your field or decrease it, all of this is generated and accessible through the shadow DOM. So if we have web components and we have a faceless, Drupal, and we can just put features on top of that, and it, makes the process easier to develop a website that's more accessible and less insecure, at least. So for example, you could have a Drupal table drag custom element if you have something like that. So you can reuse the whole table drag stuff from Drupal within your non-Drupal UI, but just using the bare minimum from Drupal, so you don't get all the messy stuff. So does that sound like something that you would do? I mean, so who's developing kind of faceless website or decoupled website right now? Okay. So what kind of issue do you run into? I mean, so I'm assuming you don't use the Drupal rendering at all. So you have to do all the filtering and escaping of the data yourself, yeah? Yeah. So do you have anything slipped through the cracks usually? Some kind of XSS security stuff, no? Well, maybe you don't know yet about it. I don't know. So, I mean, this whole session is about how to make Drupal, easy to work with within a decoupled situation. So just making some features available to people who don't want to use Drupal, but I mean, they still need accessibility, they still need security, and they still need some, shortcuts to implement Drupal features. So how can we get there? So the first thing is to have, at least on the Drupal side, a clean base to work with, so we can pick and choose what we want to expose to people who want to use it, outside of Drupal. So I'm pretty sure people are not going to agree with that. So, feel free to stop me and tell me I'm wrong. Well, within the JS, we try to make as few assumptions as possible, which is why we are not going with a full, Angular or React UI yet, at least, I don't know. We favor native functionality and vanilla JavaScript, so we don't have a huge amount of dependencies to be able to use the Drupal stuff, eventually outside of Drupal. And generally, we try to stay out of the way. So who doesn't agree with some of this? Are you shy or just so wrong you can't speak, So let's assume this is, correct. What are the tools that we use within Drupal or that we could use to make it easier? So first we have eslint. Who's used eslint before? Or JSLint or whatever, JavaScript linter? Okay, so most of you. Are you aware that now eslint can auto-fix some of the white space issues that it finds? So if you have like your function always needs a space before the opening parenthesis, eslint can fix that automatically. So just run the command line, change your file, and you're valid. There are a few rules about semicolon, that kind of stuff. So it's been nicer to clean up code now. NPM, we are not using it in Drupal yet because we have a messed up way of including third-party dependencies. But eventually, we would like to use it properly, but then we need a build system around that, and that's not something we have yet. Who's heard of Babel JS? Yeah, so we have a new version of JavaScript, ES6 or ES 2015, that has some incompatibilities with the current JavaScript version. So new features, but not compatible. So Babel the whole point is to make ES6 JavaScript into ES5, so any browser can run it. So you are able to use the new features of the JavaScript language without breaking the old browsers. And if you want to use, so GraphQL that was shown this morning, the module is using ES6 JavaScript, so fancy features of the language, and using Babel to compile back down to ES5. So you can use it on, IE, basically. Browserify or, Webpack. Who heard about that? Okay, most of you. So just, compile all your stuff into one file or several files, and, use JavaScript modules and load them and, all that kind of stuff. And JSDoc. So, it's nice to have code, a lot of code, but if you don't document it, it's useless, basically. So, who's been, searching for how Drupal core JavaScript worked and, couldn't find out? Okay, a lot of you. So you'd be happy to know that we are now adopted JSDoc as the official JavaScript documentation format for JavaScript. And most of the files are written in that standard. In the end, it's going to be on api.drupal.org, but for now, it's on my personal site. So you can go to this URL, and you will have the whole Drupal 8 JavaScript API documented. So, the custom, not all of them, but some custom events, all the behaviors that you have, all the behaviors that do have an attach function, and the one that don't have an attach, a detach function. See, all that kind of stuff, you can see that at this URL. And there's a few patches left for some files that are not documented yet. So if you feel like doing some documentation, let me know. I can point you to the right issue. Who's heard about isomorphic JavaScript? The way people are, some people use it as a way to say my JavaScript is going to run in the browser and it's going to run on Node.js, which, it's not actually a good term to use because it's misleading and, isomorphic, not everyone, especially in the JavaScript community, did computer science. Yeah, especially in JavaScript. So there are, some famous influential people that came up with a new term. So you have universal JavaScript, which is misleading again. But the one I like is shared JS. So, because it's shared between the browser and the server. It just, it's clearer that way. So, who was like, oh, what's isomorphic the first time they heard it? Yeah, at least some people are honest. I was as well. Shared JS is just makes more sense. Testing. Who's doing JavaScript testing? not many people, like 3 people. Yeah, well. Yeah, we don't do that in Drupal either. And there's a few effort to make it happen, but it's not there yet. There's an issue open so that we are able to test, not do unit test of the JavaScript, because it's not possible with the way our JavaScript is written, but do functional tests. So, go on the node edit page, upload an image, and see if it works. So that, well, will be possible, hopefully, soon, maybe. Talk to Daniel about it. He's working on that. There's been several core conversation, several presentations at DrupalCons about front-end testing, and we're not anywhere in Drupal core yet. So if you have, anything to suggestion, anything, just let me know, and hopefully we can get that in at some point in Drupal 8, maybe. So I just said you can't unit test the JavaScript now because of the way it's written. And it's mainly because we put everything into one file. So for example, the vertical tabs, there's a kind of a library component because there's a small API on how to manage the vertical tabs. But there's also the initialization code within the same file. So, it's messy to load the file and try to unit test every method because, the initialization runs as well. And we have to, mess around to prevent that from happening instead of having a proper library file and a proper initialization file. Well, that's something we need to fix. And while refactoring, which is probably going to happen whenever Drupal 9 happens, so I don't know. By that time, we should be able to use ES6 on all browsers, because the latest version of IE is going to use, it's actually the best one to use ES6 on right now, because it has implemented the most features of the ES6 specification. So we should be able to use the ES6, so have a proper module. I have an example afterwards. So proper modules, some shortcuts of the language to make some constructs easier. And, just separating the library from the initialization, which is basic, but we didn't do it. So now ES6. Who or the next version of JavaScript? Who heard about it? Well, who know what this is about? Okay. Are you using it? Are you using it in production? Or, no? Too conservative. So one really nice thing about ES6, it's template strings. So it's a new kind of string where you can replace stuff within the string from some variables that are in scope. So the first line is just usual JavaScript string, nothing changed. The second one shows you that you can have new line within your string, and it won't crash your JavaScript, which is nice. And the last one shows you that you can replace just placeholders with whatever the value of that variable is. So whatever you have in brackets, or I don't know, curly brackets, it's an expression. So it doesn't need to be just a variable. It could be a function call or something else, and it's going to be replaced by the value of whatever is within those curly brackets. So see the first one, the name, put that uppercase, and it shows up uppercase. Yeah, easy. I don't know how the Drupal translation thing is going to work with that yet. Hopefully it will, but I don't know for sure. But it's out there, possible to use whenever ES6 is around. And if you use Babel.js, you can use that, and it will do all the messy work of making that work on older browsers. Who heard about that already? Nice, at least some new stuff for you. ES6 modules. Who's been using CommonJS, AMD, or the UMD definition, whatever? Yeah, some of you. Anyone tried to see the ES6 module spec? No? Yeah, quickly. I mean, it's fairly easy. You just put export in front of whatever you want to export, and that's it. I mean, there are some more rules about how to export things, but this is, I mean, the easiest way to do it. And then within another file, you import it, so it's similar to Python or, I don't know, most language on how to import stuff. So you can import all the exported function and variables into an object, or just import specific function of the whole module. I mean, there are a few more rules as well, but it's very flexible, and that way you can keep your code fairly clean, you know, in the sense of you don't have useless variables in your scope. So Promise. Who knows about Promise? Are you using any version of Promise, like with jQuery or a polyfill or something? Yeah. So it's nicer than, you know, ugly callbacks, right? Oh, no? Oh, you're never happy. So basically, it's a way to make subsequent callbacks not messy. I mean, there's more to it, but what you would use it day to day is more like that. So instead of having a very deep nesting of function, because you wait on that callback to finish to execute that one, and so on, you can just chain them at the same level with Promise. I mean, that's basically, there's more to it again, but we can talk about that if you have questions afterwards. And now to slide a bit. Question? No?
On the previous slide, is that also a new short function syntax or macro syntax?
Right, yes. Yeah, so it is a new function syntax, yeah, definition. I mean, I left there because it was in the example, but we can't really use it, so because IE and everything. Yeah, just to make callbacks less verbose. And so now I'm just going to slip into the Dries keynote thing that he was talking about this morning, about GraphQL and, you know, aggregating callbacks into one request to get, you know, more data and not do a lot of things. There's also WebSocket that you can use to do similar thing, not the same, but similar. And it's basically just an open channel between the server and your browser, and you can send data to it and get it without making new AJAX calls or that kind of stuff. So who used WebSockets already? Right, so you know about how that works. I mean, yeah, well, we can talk about that after. So this morning I was a bit surprised on the focus on the whole decoupled stuff of Dries. And I mean, the concept is nice, but the way it applies to Drupal core is maybe, I maybe not agree entirely with that. For example, take GraphQL. It's a piece of software from Facebook. I mean, it's just that right now Facebook is, you know, pushing out technology, features, that kind of stuff, mainly because it makes them looks good and get them to hire people. But once that's, you know, stabilized and they get enough people, they're probably going to stop, you know, releasing software and that kind of stuff.
and then we are stuck with it. I mean, it's great for contrib, for example, but I'm not sure about core. And progressive decoupling, so what do you write on that? Yeah, I don't remember, sorry. I'm sure you have lots of things to talk about. So, yeah, and I mean, one more thing about the GraphQL and corporate technology is that with Drupal, at least my goal personally is to use Drupal to leverage to improve the standing of web standard. So to make web standard actually used on website, so that browser implementer can develop things and say, oh well, they use it, so we're going to continue improving our stuff, and not rely on polyfills all the time. And so adding a specific format that is not yet a standard, I mean maybe, but I'm not fond of it. But I'm not the only one contributing, so it doesn't matter. All right, so anything you want to discuss about decoupled websites, the way we can make existing components of Drupal reusable on headless websites, or whatever else? Or even if you have stories about how hard is it or easy to write a decoupled website, feel free to participate. No question. Yeah. No.
So, for example, what do we have in Drupal 8?
Can you just go to the mic because it's recorded? Thanks.
Okay. What do we have in Drupal 8 for decouple the headless Drupal and?
Well, you have the whole REST API.
Yeah.
But that's basically it.
That's all we have. The REST API.
Pretty much. I mean, it's headless, so.
Yeah, but for example, for ES6, is there any plan for implementing it or using it with polyfills, as you said before?
Well, you were looking at the plan, basically.
There's none.
No, well, there's no plan because. So right now we have not enough JavaScript contributors and too many things to fix. And ES6 is not a high priority, especially given the browser support. And having Drupal rely on something like Babel is not really feasible because of all those PHP developers that like to complain. Requiring nodejs to use Drupal, they don't like it. So unfortunately, we don't have an easy way to use ES6 right now. But if you have ideas on how to improve the support in a core without having to rely on it, I'm open to it. Oh wow, that killed you.
Hi. So how can we start refactoring all that JavaScript without having any tests at all?
That's a good question. Anybody want to answer? So how to refactor? Well, first we need to get rid of the old stuff we have. Like for example, the oldest script we have is table drag. It's also one of the most complex, which is why it's the oldest. So refactoring that in a way that's a bit more modern would help us start to move the other thing across. But the first step we could take is just separating out the library and initialization. So if we have two files, then we can do a bit more. There are some components that still use the Drupal.behavior object to store some state or utility function. And this should not be in the behavior object. It should be in their own Drupal.whatever library object. So they are like the machine name. this still uses Drupal.behavior for custom stuff. It shouldn't. So just removing that from the behaviors, separating the files, is going to be a first step, and then we can talk about making actual, ES6 or CommonJS modules out of them.
And do you think that would be accepted before 8.0?
No.
So it's 8.1 material.
Or even later. Ooh. I mean, because it's a lot of work and not enough people.
Yeah. Thank you.
If there's like 20 people who want to work on it, yeah, maybe. Yeah, well, they just die at some point, and we don't see them anymore. Is that a bootstrap question?
So you were talking about using like native JavaScript, and my question, I guess, is, are we going to stop relying so much on jQuery, for instance, and like, for instance, the attach and detach behaviors and stuff like that, or are we going to implement something more custom using native stuff, or?
That's a good question. I like it because I didn't put the slide, but I wanted to talk about that. So the first step in that whole jQuery story is first to identify whatever we were using and reducing what we used to what we actually needed. So it went from using the .click function alias to using .on all over the place. That way, if we have to replace it, it's much easier. So that's the first step. Then we need to identify the thing we abuse jQuery for. It's mostly done, but there's still some areas where we don't, we shouldn't be using it. And I've started working on a tool that analyzes your JavaScript file and compile a specific jQuery version with only the modules that you need from jQuery. Because maybe you don't know, but for a while, I think it's jQuery 1.8, you're able to build custom version of jQuery with specific modules from jQuery. For example, if you don't use the Ajax functionality, you get rid of all the Ajax code and get a smaller JavaScript file. So the tool I worked on is jQuery, so like a query that, stone and everything, to dig into what you use and build the custom smaller version of jQuery. And what I'm hoping to do is to have Drupal run on the subset of jQuery that's a bit smaller. But it didn't go as well as I thought. But yeah, we're not trying to go with Zepto or alternative jQuery stuff. No question? I got all day.
So, first of all, I should mention I've never ever tried to implement nothing like you were describing, but since actually I'm more of a backend person, but since these days the critical queue is all about finishing our safe markup stuff and so on. I was wondering, when you say that with what we have right now, we are forced basically to re-implement all filtering and all escape and all sanitizing on the client side, are you talking about encoding, let's say passing encoded HTML markup into JSON data and then sticking it in the client?
Yep.
And so these days we are talking about implementing alternative output strategies, they are called. And I think they are very similar to what Twig already does. In fact, probably we will end up trying to borrow from that as much as possible. But anyway, the idea is that can we try to find a dedicated strategy so that we already have a way to have markup that's encoded into JSON data or already sanitized in a way that makes sense? Or it would depend on context, even on the client side. So there's no one-size-fits-all solution for that.
I think it ties into the GraphQL stuff from this morning, because so with the REST API, when you query a node, you get all the attributes for your node, and half of it you don't use, and there's just body text and it's raw data. So I mean, maybe we could have the REST module give you sanitized HTML, well, depending on your text format, but then you still have all the other stuff on your node that you don't use, and something like GraphQL could just give you the stuff you need and escape it and make sure it's escaped. I don't know. It's possible.
I have something.
Yeah?
They're thinking about the display.
Microphone.
Or that one if you...
We've been discussing something like display modes for REST, so where you can just select the fields that you want to show when you do the REST request.
There you go. That would solve it.
Yeah. We actually discussed much of this when designing the REST module in the first place, and largely what it came down to is we could escape data, but escape it how? Even within HTML, the escaping for something that's going to appear between tags or something that's going to appear in an attribute is very different, and if you get it wrong, it's use the wrong one, that's another security hole. So our basic, in a sense, we decided to punt because we couldn't come up with a way to reliably do that would work for all receiving clients. You can do that for a specific site. The way Drupal is set up, REST module is there as almost a demo module. So if you have a specific site where I'm going to want this node rendered this way all the time for this use case, you can do that with your own custom format, your own custom routes. All the capability to do that is there, but then your context, whereas Drupal can't know all of the contexts it might need. That's actually something we're running into with all the render API work, that pretty much every time you make an assumption about the context something's going to be escaped for, you're wrong. Unless you are in that context already, you're going to be wrong. So yeah, I think as a practical matter, a generic pre-escaped output is just not going to be viable. A site-specific pre-escaped output that you custom code, totally doable, go for it. But a generic one, I just don't think is going to be secure enough and stable enough to really work. And yes, I like the view modes idea for reducing the amount of data you send. That is good, and
also the format.
Yeah, the format again. You actually have to render the format. That's part of the problem. But selecting the fields, we didn't do that in REST module again, mostly for saving time to keep it simple. But I fully support the option for RESTful view modes.
Are there any plans, or on the contrary, any strong objection about introducing more event-based things like event emitters and listeners?
So event, like what, for example?
In JavaScript, event emitters and listeners in the way we have, attached behaviors and things like that. Yeah. That could be another way, and it ties well with Node.js. And
so
avoiding, callback hell thing.
We do have a few events, but they're mostly for some UI stuff. Like, for example, if you open the toolbar, the space available to display the website changes. So we trigger an event that say, if you do something with positioning, you need to, check that it's still at the right position. That's the kind of events we have, but we don't have, more involved events. If you save something, there's no dedicated event, for example. Oh, was that what you were talking about?
Yeah, more or less. If there was plan to move toward more of them, actually.
Well, in the case of behaviors, we can't really move to events because we need to be able to order them. I mean, it's not in yet. There's a patch waiting for a while in the queue to be able to choose which behavior you want to run and in which order. So anybody used the Drupal behavior wait module? No, it doesn't matter because, yeah. I mean, typically that's to get rid of that module. So you're able to choose more specifically what you want to run. But yeah, behavior not going to be events, and more events, it's not planned yet. Yeah, so I just wanted to share this, architecture diagram because that's a good way to actually use, decoupled Drupal. If you just have Drupal and then your Angular React app, I don't think it's a good, use of your time to develop that. You should have, some component between your Drupal and your frontend that does more stuff, and aggregates data from somewhere else, or just aggregates data from the Drupal in a different way. I mean, that's a good way to use Angular and the whole decoupled stuff. But if it's just Drupal and Angular, not worth it. Especially in D8 now that the whole theming experience is much, much nicer. Don't have to fight a crazy person. Any more questions? I guess we're done. Thank you. Good. And you? Yeah, because he was talking about that when I was. Yeah, I'm going to be CTO.
He's getting there. Trust me, he's a really good guy, super smart. Yeah, that's good. See you tonight for some beers. Yeah. Okay.
Oh yeah. Oh, that's you.
Oh, no, thanks to you. I mean, without you, no documentation. No, seriously, thank you. Fixing bugs. Now it's separating all the stuff from behaviors and libraries, so we could start testing. Yeah. So basically, you create same file name .init, add it to the library. I'm a bit less. I mean, I'm not a fan of the whole UNT declaration. Like checking for export, define. Well, so I don't know how they handle
That's fine. Yeah. Okay, so obviously that's what. And your captain, by playing, be able to cope with some code.
It's the page. It's just hidden from the usual.
That's just this like the initial briefing, right? If we would just say last week.
Yeah, but then if you have custom elements, I mean, you can still have child elements of that.
Okay.
You can still have some kind of data that's relevant to the widget. I mean, it's not all in the import. The import should be just a structure, this template and some script whenever you click on it. But the data can be still in the page. Well, it should be still.
I agree with is Headful another way of saying having widgets essentially, having Drupal give the page some of the widgets on different pages, which I guess are provided in nodejs and
I wasn't going to that's what Headful thing, but yeah.
Oh, because we're currently trying to do the same thing for that very reason. The CMS experience is completely gone, and then it's more or less positioning these widgets, which are
yes.
Okay. All right, thanks. That's good. That was really interesting.
So I guess I should like maybe expand it a little bit more. Then, if the goal is to move towards ES6 and possibly web components, and using the JavaScript, obviously that would inherently mean the jQuery kind of like that's what I was trying to say.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah. Is that what like getting out of the ultimate goal maybe?
Oh yeah, it's probably like
Yeah. I agree. I just love to hear it.